Welcome to Coast View, the show that every single day celebrates the men and women who are making coastal Mississippi, and Mississippi for that matter, such a great place to live, work, and play. Hey, listen, I want to bring your attention to, if you missed it, the show that I had with Robert St. John yesterday, the restaurateur and author and columnist, and he's a producer. He's just a guy who hits on a lot of cylinders, owns multiple restaurants here in Mississippi, writes cookbooks. But he's just a very inspiring person. He's a good friend. And one of the parts of the conversation was when he was in Italy, and his Tuscany is kind of his home away from home, spends 3 months in Europe every year now. He told a story about Mississippi being the birthplace of American music, and we got into a conversation about that. And I told about the conversation that I had recently with Christian Hartley from Pascagoula, and this notion that we all feel about this extra burden that's on us when we leave Mississippi to put Mississippi's best foot forward and to sort of dispel myths. The reality is that every community, every state has work to do. We have work to do, but we have come a long way. And this state, in a lot of respects, and this is being said without a political. I'm not looking through a political lens when I say this. I'm just looking at it as a person who has experienced Mississippi for most of my life, and that's what Christian was sharing as well, and that's of course what Robert was sharing yesterday. That we have a responsibility when we leave here to show people who we are. What's in our heart and soul, what's in the DNA of Mississippians, and it's just dispel myths, frankly, about this place. And it was just a great conversation. So if you missed it, you can go to the SuperTalk Gulf Coast Facebook page. You can go to the SuperTalk Mississippi Facebook page. You can go to your favorite podcast platform. You can go to YouTube. However, people want to watch the show or listen to the show. And I'm really thrilled. As I said yesterday, 67 straight days of engagement, tens of thousands of people engaged in our show just on social media, not to mention what's happening with those of you listening on 103.1. So I really appreciate it. We've got a great show today. I've got a couple of quotes I want to share with you. I noticed recently that Chuck Yeager, the test pilot who broke the sound barrier, was born in February 1923. And of course, he was incredibly successful throughout his life. And one of the things that he said was this: you don't concentrate on risks, you concentrate on results. Think about being a test pilot. You don't concentrate on risk, you concentrate on results. And those who take risks, incidentally, they're often rewarded, even if they have to fake it a little bit in the beginning until they make it. You've heard people talk about that before. My friend Frank Willem, a great entrepreneur here in coastal Mississippi, said this, or actually posted this, and I don't know who said it, but it's really good. He says, a wise man once said, "Be careful who you let in your ship, because some people will sink the whole ship just because they can't be the captain." Woo! I've seen that in my career. People sometimes, I don't care some people you can't build the tent big enough to bring them in. They want to be on the outside looking in. And that certainly goes true if you're talking about being in a boat with them. Whew, that is so true. And then lastly, someone posted this. It's by a guy named Max Lucado, and here's what he said: "Don't worry about having the right words. Worry about having the right heart." Man, I see that in so many people that I have on this show, that people have such amazing hearts here in coastal Mississippi. And that's what makes this place so special to live, work, and play. Now, with that said, speaking of heart, what a great lead in to my friend Kristen LeBoeuf, who's the executive director for the American Heart Association. We've got a lot to talk about, Kristen and me, but before we go any further, let me just say welcome back to Coast View, Kristen.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to watch your show, listen to the fabulous guests that you have, and everything they talk about, and the love of coastal Mississippi and Mississippi as a whole. And so I'm honored and appreciative for the opportunity to join you again today.
Thank you so much. We've had over 800 conversations in 3 years. It's amazing to me that time has gone by that quick. But I knew this. You knew me at the Sun Herald. We worked together closely there, and I knew this before I did this show. I especially learned this after Katrina and wrote about it, that this is an incredibly resilient set of communities that make up coastal Mississippi. The people here have in their DNA something special. They're kind, they're caring. There's always going to be exceptions to the rule, but as a whole, we are it's the people that keep bringing people back here. And you have a great history in coastal Mississippi, and you've done well with your career. And you're one of those people that I believe has a kind heart, and you're wanting to make a difference. And it seems to me it was perfect for you to land at the American Heart Association, because you've had a great career there, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Actually, last month I celebrated 16 years at the American Heart Association, and believe so much in the work that we do, and the good that we do, and the opportunity to continue to do that. Believe so much in the volunteers that we are fortunate to work with, amazing, incredible people who care about our community. And that's really why I'm here. I was brought here because my family's been profoundly impacted by cardiovascular disease and stroke. And I continue to stay here because of the amazing work that we do and with the fantastic people we do it with.
Well, you've done well, but as you well know, I'm not surprised, because as we were sharing before the show started, I can remember you were newlywed, you're sitting in my office, and we're talking about work in the community. And I'm looking back now. You mentioned before the show started that your oldest is 14 years. Your oldest of 3 kids is 14 years old, and we were having conversations before you had your first child. But I remember seeing in you then just incredible fire in your eye to want to succeed, to want to make a difference. You were incredibly articulate. Everything that I thought you would be, you've done. And, still the sky's the limit. I noticed recently you took on even more responsibility, and we'll get into some conversations about the geography that now that you have to say grace over. But, I'm proud of you for what you've done.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And that means a lot. I can remember coming to your office and talking about leadership, talking about the community, talking about how to work with people. Gosh, even talking about, I remember being pregnant with my oldest and talking about learning experiences as a parent and parenting. And some of those things I stick with every day, especially now that my children are older and stakes get a little bit higher. And so I think about some of those things you talked about, especially listening. You talked about your wife listening. And that has always stuck with me, listening, and the things that they're not saying, picking up on that. So thank you.
Well, what's important about that? We reflect on here a lot. I've had a growing number of conversations with young leaders, emerging leaders, and actually the way they refer to themselves is next up. This getting, when you get into your 30s and 40s now, it's getting about time that these are the people who are going to step up and to the chairman of the ship of the Coast Business Council and other organizations like that, the American Heart Association and others. But I've had a growing number. And one of the things we talk about often, Kristen, is the importance of that mentoring relationship. And one of the things you and I were sort of reminding ourselves of is that all you had to do is call Karen, my assistant, and get on my calendar. You didn't even have to let me know you were coming. And I had a number of young people that could do that. Just all they had to do is just get on my calendar, and we would sit and talk about how to the way of the world and how to make your work in the community stronger. And it made a difference, didn't it? That we had. Listen, by the way, it made as much of a difference to me as it probably did for you. And that I gained a deep appreciation for, and to be honest with you, it was a sense of hope for me that young people like you were coming along that were going to be able to kind of take over, be the next up in this community. But it was important, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was. And I think, number one, the safe space to ask the questions. And so often you don't want to be perceived as not knowing. You don't want to maybe show some vulnerability, but you really have to have those trusted colleagues, those trusted role models that you can ask those questions, ask for a deeper understanding, ask for clarity, run solutions off of, and really just continue to gain experience, and ultimately those conversations lead to how you become a leader and how you lead people, how you lead teams, and how you lead also in your family.
It all connects. You have responsibilities, of course, for coastal Mississippi, and then South Alabama, and more recently, Northwest Florida was added. When we come back from the break, I want you to sort of tell me what you have to say grace over, and we will remind people about the American Heart Association, and more recently with us all watching Damar Hamlin on that field. It touched us all, and me as a former paramedic, having done CPR many times in my life, it's a great focus that we're all having, sort of divine intervention moment for America and the world about the importance of CPR, and we'll talk about that. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Coast View. You know, as a young guy, I went to University of Alabama in Birmingham right after I got out of high school and went to paramedic school. It was, at the time, Mississippi didn't have an advanced paramedic system in Mississippi, but Alabama did. And so I learned to become an advanced paramedic. We were taught to, really intense, like a care of trauma patients. It could play out in so many different ways, but of course, we were given defibrillators. We had drugs that could help in a situation where someone was in cardiac arrest, and so on. I was extraordinarily well trained at one of the better paramedic schools in the nation. Came back and worked for a while, and then went to pre-med. And along the way, I came to the realization, I got a little bit older, that my personality didn't fit being an emergency room physician. That's really what I really wanted to be. But I was type A personality, and I'm a guy who really, if you think about like spreadsheets and P&Ls and learning the data and all of that, that's kind of the way my mind works. And to be a doctor, you have to take a bit of a leap of faith. And you have to be somewhat removed from your patients as it relates to sort of the emotional side of it. And I came to the realization probably going to be hard for me. And so anyway, to make a long story short, though, the thing that, I decided to start working and going back to school. Unfortunately, really early after I made that decision, I found my own father dead. He was only 44 years old. And unfortunately, there was nothing I could do to help him. He had died in his sleep. But, after having the experience I had as a paramedic and then having that experience, it has a way of making you grow up. It has a way of making you appreciate life. It has a way of changing everything about you. And so, I went on to get a degree in business and an MBA. I did an internship at the Sun Herald. The rest is history. But my experience as a paramedic, having been in many, many, many situations involving CPR, my time since I was a paramedic, many times I've been engaged in CPR. One time at Ground Zero after September the 11th in New York City, literally on the grounds, a guy dropped literally dead in front of me, and I did CPR on him. Me and a young man from Verizon, and 20 minutes we did CPR on this man. And a month or so later, I got a note from him thanking me for life. And then for every year after that, he was from Annapolis, Maryland, and he sailed all over the world actually. And he would send me a picture once a year of him behind the wheel of a sailboat with some foreign land. It was just, gosh, man, that touches you. And anyway, I've had the opportunity to do CPR many times, and as most of you know who are regular listeners, a little over a year ago, my granddaughter stopped breathing, and I had to do mouth to mouth on her. And that was definitely an incredibly emotional moment. But the reality is, the doctors, the paramedics, everyone concludes the same thing. It was a really good thing I was there, because had I not done what needed to be done, she would not have lived. It's that clear and that profound. And my family and I, and every day we look at Mila, we thank God. We thank God that we were all around her in that moment and when she needed help. So bystander CPR, we cannot emphasize that enough. We're going to talk about that here in just a second, but I just wanted to share that story with you as sort of a lead into the discussion that we're going to have with Kristen LeBoeuf as we continue our conversation together. So, Kristen, it's heavy to share that experience, and we're going to come back to it in just a second. But I saw you shaking your head. But you know, the elevator speech on learning bystander CPR in the wake of Damar Hamlin, and how that brought into crystal clear focus global awareness of the need to know CPR. It has really changed your world, hasn't it?
It has. You know, before Damar Hamlin went into cardiac arrest on the football field, which we watched, I mean, I watched it in real time. My son and I, my 12-year-old and I, and you knew immediately this was not normal. This was not just a concussion, not that that's to be taken lightly either. And so it really sharpened the focus on the critical need to learn CPR, and for everybody to at least have some knowledge of what to do, when to do it, and the importance of it, because it's called sudden cardiac arrest for a reason. It's sudden. It doesn't.
And the reality is CPR works. It works.
Yeah.
The data is so profound. It's unbelievably important how good it works. We'll come back to all of this in just a second. Let's put the American Heart Association on the map for people who haven't really thought about it in a while. Talk to me about what you guys do and what you're up to these days.
Well, we're up to a lot. And in 2024, the American Heart Association will celebrate our 100th anniversary. And so it's incredible to believe that we've been around for 100 years, and that the work that we are doing is so important and continues to be important. We are focusing on all the things that are barriers to health in South Mississippi. And it's so interesting. You talk about how, your experience and the experience of a lot of the people that you talk to on this show, and the responsibility to put your best foot forward as a Mississippian and to dispel those myths. And I have the opportunity to work with people across the Southeast. And I think to myself, what we face here is not unique to us, right? It is unique in some of the factors, but people all across the Southeast and across the country still face the same issues in terms of health equity that we do in South Mississippi. And the onus is on us to make a difference.
Well, I said you now have responsibility for South Mississippi, South Alabama, which I spent a lot of time at as publisher of the Mobile Press Register and president of Alabama Media Group, and then Northwest Florida, the Panhandle portion. You've got, it's interesting. You've really grown, and you've got a lot there's a lot to say grace over. You're juggling a bunch of balls these days, aren't you?
Yeah, I am in different areas and different time zones, managing that, managing all different volunteers, an amazing team of staff and donors and volunteers who really care about the work that we do and care about the communities we serve. And I think that is what gives me joy.
I mentioned to you before we started the show that I was going to tell you just a really, really quick story, but as the higher you get in an organization, the more you have to say grace over. And this is where delegation and leadership and true management comes to fruition. But what I often said is, if someone's in a CEO role like you are, think of it as sort of, look, if you're at your desk and there are ping pong balls on your desk, and each ping pong ball has another responsibility on it, and then the next one has another responsibility on it, and so on. Your goal is to sort of get far enough away from it that you can see all the ping pong balls. In other words, such that, if there's a gust of wind or maybe someone passes by, that a ball doesn't fall off. Okay. The reality is that too many people get so close to a few balls that while they're close to those balls, they don't realize that these balls are falling off. So it's the goal is to stay sufficiently close, but sufficiently far away that you can see, sort of globally, all these balls. The goal is to keep the balls on top of the table. Well, I used to tell that story all the time. And one day I was having a conversation with my press room manager at the Sun Herald, and I left to go to the lunch. And when I came back, he had gone and bought a case of ping pong balls. And when I walked back into my office, he had poured these these balls into my office. It was so hilarious, but it was him sort of demonstrating that he really understood what we were talking about. But that's a good explanation. You do have a lot of balls you got to juggle at any given time, don't you?
You're right. And I had not heard that analogy before. And as you were saying this, I'm thinking, boy, we've got some balls that are close to the edge, or some stuff that maybe I've been really zeroed in on just a few of those and probably need to zoom out a little bit. But you're right. Being a leader is really getting out of that microscopic thinking, backing up and saying, okay, where do we need to go? Who do we need to go with, and how are we going to get there? And just making sure that you're empowering your team and volunteers all along the way to do that. And I think developing leaders, and part of that is listening and just having conversations and leading in the way that you want to be led as well. I always try to do that.
I love the way you humbly say that you probably have some balls close to the edge. But the truth is that if everyone is honest who is in a leadership role, there are always balls close to the edge,
Absolutely.
And the question ultimately is, can you trust the people that are working with you to make sure that if there is one next to the edge, that they're kind of beating it back a little bit? Yeah. And that would enable you to have focus over here, where maybe one's maybe going over the edge, and you can pick it back up and get it back on top of it. But if you think about it in those terms, yours is to give people the authority, give them the responsibility, and help them through delegation to do the job. But at the end of the day, you kind of have their back too at the same time. Absolutely. To help them. So when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Kristen LeBoeuf, and we will have a pretty detailed discussion about bystander CPR. And there's also nutrition security, which is a big issue for Mississippi. We want to talk about that as well. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Coast View. I have my friend Kristen LeBoeuf, who is the executive director for the American Heart Association, and we go back a long way. So this is not a surface conversation about the American Heart Association. This is a serious conversation between two people who admire one another and have worked together in the community for a lot of years, and it is really, really it has led to some important conversations, more specifically as it relates to bystander CPR that we're going to have now. But we mentioned Damar Hamlin. When I watch him at the Super Bowl and the way he sort of dealt with the situation, the interviews that he's had, my sense, at least at this moment, is that he seems to be humble. He seems to be the right person for this job. I don't think I'm misreading that. Of course, time will tell. Is he up to the challenge of what the world sees in him today? This messenger about the importance of CPR. But you guys have really latched on to the moment as a learning opportunity, and I'm actually curious to know what has been the level of activity that has sort of rolled out of that moment.
Well, it is certainly accelerated and amplified bystander CPR and the importance of learning CPR. I think it's also afforded us to have conversations that we might not have had with people that we might not have spoken to before. Damar currently is partnering with the American Heart Association on a 3 for Heart challenge, where he's challenging the entire country, the entire world, to learn bystander CPR, and challenge 3 others to do so. And I look at him, and you mentioned the Super Bowl and that moment where he was recognized, or the first responders were recognized. Talk about a powerful moment to recognize them, and then here he comes, and it gives me goosebumps to even think he is here because they responded, because those staff immediately recognized and immediately went into action. And it's incredible to think about that. Also, I watched some of the interviews. There was one in particular with Michael Strahan, where Michael Strahan was asking him, what do you remember? How do you feel about that? And to recall, this is still a young man who is processing at the same time. What happened to him? He died on that field. I mean, he, and it was watched by millions and millions across the world. And then it became the story itself, and we also closely followed his recovery and were concerned about him. And we saw it play out in real life. And here's a young man who's processing that, and it's still so fresh for him. And so I think you're right. I think he is the right person to share this message and to raise this awareness. But we also have to recognize he's a young man who's going through something that's unfathomable, and processing that and recovering. And what does it mean for his career? What does it mean for his future? I mean, all of that.
Yeah, it was interesting to see his answer that, and more than once he said, I'm not ready to talk about that yet.
Yeah.
And, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what he means by that. Did he have a light in the tunnel experience that he's trying to figure out what that looks like? So many, even the guy that I had the opportunity to do CPR on in New York, he talks in this sort of afterlife phrase. He said the way he wrote about it, I have to go back and grab what he wrote about it, but he said something like this. He says, I could see you guys doing CPR on me. And he said, I wasn't, how did he say it? He says, it wasn't concerning. It was calm, is the way he talked about it. And it goes on from there. But, is DeMar trying to understand what all that meant? I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I wish also he may not have a good, clear memory of all of that. You know what I mean? So he's still trying to put it all together. And it's still also not entirely clear what the, ongoing medical ramifications might be for him. That's still a bit unclear. But the fact that he's sitting there having a conversation and able to really appreciate the fact that he's in a position now that can make a difference, that in and of itself is so powerful.
It is. Well, and immediate CPR works. Look at Damar Hamlin. 2 weeks later, we had another high-profile person go into cardiac arrest, didn't receive immediate CPR, ultimately passed away. We've had stories. I feel like as soon as it happened to Damar, just stories were popping up, and it's like these things happened before Damar Hamlin went into cardiac arrest on a football field, but they happen. Over 350,000 people will go into cardiac arrest outside of a hospital setting annually in the United States. And so this is not new. It's become a little bit higher profile, and the time to act and the opportunity to share with people that they can be of assistance is now. And so I think that's important for people to know. We were working on advocating for all things CPR. I mean, the American Heart Association is at the forefront of CPR, the science that develops CPR, and we're the ones who update the guidelines every few years on CPR, and in constant search of improving the process and improving the chain of survival. And it starts with the people like you and I who, and you mentioned that, about your granddaughter, and thank God you were there. 70% of out-of-hospital cardiac arrests happen in the home setting. So if you are, statistically speaking, going to perform bystander CPR on someone, it's going to be someone that you know and you love. And I think that's what touches me the most. I can't imagine being in a position to not act or to feel helpless. And so that's part of what drives me in this work around bystander CPR is I want to make sure everybody knows what to do and can act, and so they're not helpless. That's important.
Kristen, time is so important, and that's why people, if someone were to go into cardiac arrest, you gotta act quickly. Each minute that goes by is bringing the situation closer and closer to a dire outcome. Maybe the person lives, but there's brain damage. There's all kinds of other issues that come with that. I recall once at the Sun Herald, I was in my office one day, and I got a call that an office supply guy had just what had happened is he fainted. That's the way they described it. He fainted in the newsroom, and literally right outside of Stan Tyner's office. And so he fainted in the newsroom, and so they called 911. They didn't call me at the time, but they called 911. Well, he wasn't initially in cardiac arrest, but he was quickly heading in that direction. And when they saw that he was really seemed to be in trouble because he was breathing up to this point, they called me and said, Ricky, can you come into the newsroom real quickly? Well, I arrived in the newsroom literally at the moment the paramedics arrived at the newsroom, and it was clear that he was at that moment going into cardiac arrest. And so one of the paramedics and I did chest compressions. He got an airway open, and we did CPR and, started the process. He was in VFib. They shocked him, and they got a heartbeat, and then they brought him to the hospital. And anyway, about a month later, there was somebody knocks on my door, and it was him and his wife, and he just came by to thank me. And no issues at all from that. And you'll hear story after story after story just like that when someone starts CPR quickly. But man, I can't overstate that enough, can I?
No, you can't. And if you see someone who is not breathing, you call 911 and immediately start chest compressions. That's bystander CPR. You don't need to focus on the chest, breath, the mouth to mouth piece. Chest compressions in that situation are just as effective and can keep things moving until help can arrive. You call 911 because of the work of the American Heart Association. We recently were able to work to get policy in Mississippi that if you call 911, no matter where you are across the state, if you're on the coast, if you're in Jackson, if you're in the Delta, if you're, in Tupelo, no matter what, if you're in any rural part of any part of the state, you are going to receive high quality verbal instruction on how to perform bystander CPR until help can arrive. So it's important to know what to do, but just as important it is to call 911 to make sure that number one, you're calling for help, and number two, they are equipped to provide high quality verbal instruction on how to perform bystander CPR.
One of the, I described this to you before, I think, but when Mila had her situation, we're getting to the end of the segment, so we'll pick this up on the other side, but one of the things that adds so much stress to a paramedic's life when they have to go to the scene is when they get to the scene where there is cardiac arrest, where someone has not started CPR, and what it does to them, how they feel about it. And we'll talk about that in just a second after this break as we continue our conversation with Kristen LeBoeuf from the American Heart Association. Welcome back to Coast View. I'm so pleased to have my friend Kristen LeBoeuf from the American Heart Association as we talk about the importance of bystander CPR. So, Kristen, when we went to break, here's something that I wanted to share with you. As first of all, as a former paramedic, I've been put in this situation many times at an early age when I really wasn't emotionally able to deal with it, to be quite honest with you. To be at the scene where someone is in cardiac arrest when no one has started CPR prior to us getting there. Every now and then it's a good outcome, but usually it was not a good outcome. For one, maybe you get the heart back, but there's been some brain damage. But when I was in my situation with Mila, by the time the paramedics got there, Mila was breathing. It wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but she was breathing. And Ann was on the phone with the 911 operator the whole time. So that, once the 911 operator knew that someone who knew what they were doing was there, she just monitored the situation, and Ann stayed in touch with her so she could communicate with the paramedics. So they came into the house realizing two different stations. They came into the house knowing that a 2-year-old wasn't breathing. But they were hearing from the 911 operator that someone was on the scene knowing what was happening. And when the paramedics walked in, their faces were literally white. And you could see them overcome with a feeling of, oh my gosh, he's breathing. And so on. So About a month later, Mila and her mother and I went to the stations, both stations, to let them see Mila. And while we were meeting with them, they told us that in most cases where there's a baby or a young child in the same situation, the outcome is too often not good. And so, the thought that they were going to have to go into a situation and deal with a child that's not breathing, you never get used to that. You never get used to that. But the fact that they got there and saw that she was starting to breathe and that I had been there, her mother's an RN, incidentally, but anyway, that what it meant to them that by the time they got there, she was breathing. Sometimes we forget about that angle, how it affects the first responders in so many incredible ways. But to know when someone is doing CPR, when they get there, gosh, does it make a big difference? And you hear that over and over and over and over again, don't you?
We do. And we are very fortunate to work with first responders all across the Gulf Coast to help us increase bystander CPR training just across the coast. We work with Biloxi Fire Department, Gulfport Fire Department, Bay St. Louis Fire Department, AMR, all across the coast, and agencies that I'm not mentioning. And it's oftentimes they are coming to people in the worst moment of their life, right? And so you're right, they are coming in and trying to imagine what's going on, and it is a sense of relief that someone is doing something, and then they can take over from there. But we've heard from them the positive outcomes and the negative outcomes. And, in the matter of 24 hours, I've been called and said, hey, let me tell you about this great story that just happened at a workplace. Someone went into cardiac arrest. An employee just jumped right in and took action until we could get there. The person survived. 24 hours later, we just came off of a call where the person was in cardiac arrest and it was a refuse to respond or refuse to perform, and no one jumped into action. And ultimately the outcome was not positive. And so it makes a difference. But for us, what we want to do is we want to make sure that every household in South Mississippi has one person who knows what to do in the event of an emergency. Number one, you're calling 911. And number two, you're going into action with chest compressions.
Let's do this. I want to, what we'll do, we'll come back in a week or two and we'll spend a couple of segments talking about nutrition security, because we can't spend enough quality time on it today. But if someone wants to, is listening to this show and has been compelled by this conversation, I hope they have been, tell them how they can learn more.
Heart.org. Go to our website, heart.org, and there are a bevy of tools and resources, from videos to infographics that underscore the difference between cardiac arrest and a heart attack. Those two terms people use interchangeably, but they're two different things and two different courses of action. And so I think you go to our website, www.heart.org, and you can find all kind of information there. You can also follow the American Heart Association on social media. This month, being Heart Month, we are really focused on advancing awareness and education around bystander CPR. It really can be that easy.
I like the notion of liking your page, liking the American Heart Association page, and getting sort of a steady dose of this, because if you don't use it, you will lose it. It should stay top of mind. It's not something you should ponder, but you should just always know that there are some basic steps you can go through that could literally save someone's life. And all you have to do is make the decision that you're going to take action. And when you're in that situation, that's what's critical. And the more trained you are, the more automated you will be when it comes into that moment, beyond sort of the emotional connection with whoever it is you're having to do CPR on. But you'll be thankful that you did that. Listen, Kristen, it's been a pleasure to spend time with you. I'm very proud of you. Keep up the good work. And we'll have you back in a couple of weeks and we'll talk about nutrition security.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you for the chance to learn from you over all these years.
Thank you. It's been a genuine pleasure. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.